Hi, and welcome back to the Unconventionalists podcast. I'm your host, Mark Leruste, and this is a very special episode. I want to introduce you to my special series, Storycast, where I get to broadcast the stories of some of the most inspiring people I've met. And in particular today, I get to sit down with my client, Daniel Costa, who I've had the immense privilege and honor to help unpack his story over the last few months. As you will hear, it's an extraordinary story, but more importantly, it's got an extraordinary message embedded into it. And we're going to do our very best to distill it and share it with you today so that you can hopefully walk away from this conversation a little more inspired, a little bit more on purpose, and also feeling like a bit more of a sense of direction and hope. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you Daniel Costa. Daniel, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much. It's awesome to finally meet you.
Yeah, I know, right? It's, for people watching or listening to this is actually the first time we met in person. And it's funny because as I walked towards the studio and I saw you from a distance, I was like, oh, that's Daniel. Yeah. I mean, it was a dodgy alley, to be fair. There was one guy in the back with AirPods on. But I'm generally really, really honored to get to sit down with you today and spend this moment. Because just to give some context to people listening, back in May 2023, a mutual friend of ours, Ali, got in touch with me. I think originally by WhatsApp, but then by email, saying something on the lines of, look, I met this guy called Daniel who's got one of the most extraordinary stories I've come across. And I recommended your book, Glow in the Dark, for him to read. And he's read it and he's enjoyed it and he would like me to introduce you both. Would that be okay? And I was like, yeah, for sure. And then we got an email introduction and you and I kind of scheduled a call. We spoke, I think, like the 16th of May, 2023, something like that. And I remember that conversation, something you said to me that stayed with me, because I always ask, people I get to work with, I was asking, like, what do you think is getting in your way of sharing your story? Do you remember what you said?
Oof. I think it was, definitely. I think it was a fear.
Yeah.
That I was scared of the power of it.
Yes, that's right. So you said, I'm scared of the power of my story. Like, I know there's this story I should be sharing, I can share, but I'm scared of the power. The other thing is you said something along the lines, I feel like I need to really unpack it and distill it so I can understand parts of the story and what kind of message lands. We're now speaking in November, end of November, so almost like December, right? So we got to work together a few months. Before we even get to begin to talk about your story, I'm just curious, selfishly, genuinely, to understand where you are now compared to where you were when I made that first conversation with you back in May. Like, do you feel there's been a transformation? Do you feel different about your relationship to your story? And if so, what's changed?
Oh, great question to start us off. I remember the first time, I remember it clearly when I met, when Ali introduced us. I remember I was driving up to Liverpool with him and he made the introduction. And I do remember the first call we had in May. At that stage, I was definitely nervous about sharing my story. Like I said, I was scared. I knew the power in it, but I didn't know how to structure a story. So previously, the year before, it's the first time I've ever shared my story publicly. But at that stage, it was more for me, for my healing. Yeah. So I just blurted it all out, something that I'd been keeping in for over 30 years. Where when I met Ali and when you came into my life, it was like, okay, cool. How do I now learn to structure a story? How do I learn to unpack my story so that it's valuable to the specific audience that I'm trying to help and serve? If I look at back 6 months ago, or even 8 months ago when we began, and I know we worked consecutively from May until the end of July, and then naturally you had a pause. I needed a pause because, as I'm sure we'll get into in a bit, it was a really challenging, uplifting journey that I knew I was going to get into it based on reading your book and reading about like how you always spoke about in your book, how your clients and the people that you serve go on a journey and how it transforms them.
Because it's hard to explain. I mean, that's one of the things that I find really difficult to put into words or even quantify the transformational journey. Because I actually said this in a recent Q&A I did about my book, where I was invited to go and speak at this community. I actually said, look, it's not at the end of the day about whether you share your story or not. I mean, obviously, I'm in the business of wanting you to have a ripple effect and make an impact as a leader. So, of course, I want you to share your story. But it's who you become in the process. Does that speak to you in some way? Do you get that? The kind of your relationship to yourself and how you interact with others and how you interact with the world changes as a result of unpacking, distilling, and kind of shaping your story?
100%. I resonate so much with that because my transformation, it basically goes into owning fully who you are. I mean, from the conversations we've had, my whole interactions with people has changed, but most importantly, my whole interaction with myself has changed. The narrative in my mind has shifted. The way I communicate has shifted. I remember the first conversation you said, our goal was to create a vending machine with different stories.
Yes.
So my communication has improved. And just the biggest thing for me is just owning fully who you are.
Yeah.
And that's the greatest gift you've given me on this journey is because you don't have to be anyone else besides you. So the way when I unpack the story with you on the journey, you always ask me such interesting questions that really force me to go deep, really force me to look at things differently. And then now, over all the months, it's like, okay, now my brain's like creating this beautiful narrative that it doesn't even have to lie or it's the truth. That's it. It's just revealing the truth of who I am.
Connecting the dots. Look, even before we begin, I just want to acknowledge you for the journey you've been on, because from the first conversation we've had to today, and just, the courage that you've had and the resiliency that you've had to show up consistently, do the work, go to places that are scary, that are uncomfortable, that anyone would rather avoid. And you did that with so much humility, so much strength and courage that you've inspired me generally. And I've come away a lot of our conversations changed. And so that's why I'm really excited today to get to dive a little bit more about your story. And before I begin, I've got to ask your permission that if it's okay for me to dive deep into your story. And if at any point you're uncomfortable with a question I ask or an area that we go, that you can just let me know.
100%. I genuinely don't say this often, but I don't think there's anyone better to guide me through this process at the moment. So ask away and I'll answer.
Yeah.
Honestly, there might be some times where I need a bit of space.
Yeah.
But if I can request, just give me that space. There might be some tears. I really want to go deep and let all that fruition of the work we've done come through.
All right. So I think the best place to start is the beginning. So you're born in South Africa, the youngest of 4 brothers. To put into context, your parents had 5 kids under 5, pretty much in terms of age differences, it feels. Tell me a bit more about what was it like in at least what you remember, your childhood in South Africa, being a part of, 4 brothers. I can imagine you must have got into a bit of mischief and running around. Tell us a bit more about that. Paint us the scene of what you remember your childhood to be.
Sure, no problem. As you mentioned, I was the youngest of 4 brothers. So it was me, and then Andre was 1 year older than me. Philip was 3 years older than me, and Michael was 4 years older than me. So as you can see, just by the huge smile on my face, I'm just thinking about all the awesome memories we had. Growing up in South Africa, both my parents were involved in the medical side industry. So my dad was a really good, renowned psychiatrist, and my mom was on the other side. She was a really good GP, general practitioner, medical doctor. And growing up with my 4 brothers, I mean, even just being a young sibling with one older brother, one older sister, I mean, the safety that you feel is tremendous.
The pack.
And I remember those 7 years of my life was unbelievable. I walked into absolutely everything with no fear. I embraced absolutely every single moment. I remember us always being outside. We grew up in a beautiful house. Both my parents were most of the time at work. So I remember being a lot with my brothers, whether it was going to the shopping center, the grocery store, coming back on our bikes with a pack on each side of the handlebars.
Looking out for each other.
Being outside. A lot of it was on the bike. A lot of it with friends from school, where there was friends from my mom's
medical
work,
practice,
her Martha, the Chabalalas, or great friends like the Kayembes from Montrose Primary, the school I went to. It was always just a community. So even though my mom or dad I don't remember them being around much, there was always me and my brothers and who else.
Yeah,
and we'd be outside just having enjoying every single day, enjoying the sunlight, and it was filled with a lot of great memories.
Because I remember you telling me once that you had these memories of you running around the house in your dad's like library. Is that right? Like there was something like your dad had an office inside the house, like these old books, and you would wrestle around and run around with your brothers. And, you know, again, I think people can relate to that. You know, most people, if they're fortunate, can remember an idyllic kind of upbringing with your brothers and your siblings and running around. But then your life took a turn and things started to change. Your parents separated. And when you're 5 years old.
4 years old.
4 years old. That's to say. So when you're 4 years old, your father takes his life.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes his life by, is it gas in the car? Is that something like that? Is there?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So he parked his car, left the window open, and then.
Yeah. So you're 4. So I don't know how much you remember about this. But what I remember you mentioning, something about that you weren't allowed to go to the funeral. Do you want to say a bit more about that? Like how that must have felt, or if you could reconnect to that 4-year-old who's in the living room watching some cartoons or doing something while everybody else goes and you've just found out that you've lost your dad. Do you remember how that felt?
Yeah, I do, definitely. I don't remember my dad at all. I don't have any memories of him. I have a slight memory of, I presume it's him, of almost like some older man giving me like a milkshake. And something resonates in my heart that was when he had already left the house and was living by himself. So for some bizarre reason that I'm pretty sure that's him, but I don't have a vivid memory of that memory or any other memories.
Yeah.
With regards to the news of him passing by taking his life, I don't remember being told that also. What I do remember vividly is not being allowed to go to his funeral. So I remember we were in the living room of the house and everyone was getting ready. Okay, we're going to your father's funeral. And then I remember vividly my mom was like, no, you're not coming. And
she was probably trying to protect you.
No, 100%. And I look back and I'm grateful for it. But at the time, there was definitely a lot of anger.
Of course.
I was pissed off, especially being the youngest sibling. You always want to go where your brothers go, you know. Right. And especially with something like that, it's almost like I wanted it to have my opportunity to say goodbye, you know, to have that memory of attending the funeral. Because I think that's important because I've just learned very young, death is a normal thing in life. It's going to come. Everyone's going to lose people. So it's just part of life. So even though I got introduced to it quite early at 4 years old, I would have definitely appreciated having gone to the funeral. So I remember when they left, I was just sitting there by myself, watching TV, pissed off, not knowing what to do. And who to talk to or anything. So it was a memory I remember vividly.
Yeah. And then things sort of go from bad to worse in a sense that in the space of you being from 5 to 7, I believe you lose your uncle, you lose your grandmother, and your mother's diagnosed with breast cancer. And I'd like, if you're okay with that, I'd like to talk about the 13th of November, 1998. To give some context around this, your mum has lost her brother, her mum. She's gone through a cancer that's, I read in your notes that she had her breast amputated. Yeah. It's Friday. Tell us about that day, what you remember from the moment that your mum came to pick you up with your brothers to going back home.
Sure. So it was like a typical Friday afternoon. You know, when you're excited for the weekend, you're leaving school. So I remember clearly my mum picked us up quite late-ish, about, I'd say around 4:30, 5 o'clock, because that was the norm. We always went to aftercare, it's called in South Africa. So the after-school program. So where you do your homework and, well, you're meant to do your homework. We got up to other things, especially on a Friday. Homework's the last thing that's on your mind. But I remember being picked up clearly. My mom picked us up we used to have a very cool old school Toyota Camry. Okay. I remember the blue color of it. My mom picked us up, and what was a normal tradition and continued being a normal tradition for the rest of my life. Most of the time would be like, okay, Friday afternoons, it's almost like on the way home, let's stop and get takeaways. So I remember clearly we stopped at a burger place called Steers, which has exceptional burgers in Johannesburg.
Shout out to Steers.
Yeah, there we go. You're welcome for that. So we stopped there. I remember we got all the burgers. We all went in and ordered the food and got back in the car and then headed back home.
And then your mum asks you to go and get dressed and go and have your shower.
Yeah, so when we arrived at home, we all just went upstairs, changed, and my mum stayed in the kitchen and we just came downstairs afterwards.
And your next memory is?
Next memory is waking up in the hospital. I was thinking about this yesterday in a weird way to wake up in terms of, when you're waking up in the morning, it's like, okay, your eyes open up slowly and you're a bit drowsy.
You're drifting in and out.
Yeah, where my initial memory, it was like sleeping and then I was wide awake. So I remember exactly that, being awakened like just with one eye opening thing. And then I remember looking up as a 7-year-old and to my left is a nurse. She's overlooking me. And I remember asking her straight away the first thing is, okay, where's my brothers? So I asked them by name. I'm like, where's Andre? Where's Philip? Where's Michael? So she's like, Philip's next to you. So I look to my left past her and I see Philip's on a hospital bed next to me, still unconscious. So I look back at her and then she says, yeah, Michael and Andre are in heaven. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, where's my mom? And she's like, yeah, she's in the hospital, but she's in a different room. And yeah, as you can see, it was just a total silence after that.
And do you process the information that's just been given to you in that moment? Do you, I know it's difficult, especially when linked to trauma, to come and connect back to memories, but you're lying in the hospital. The last thing you remember is you're having, about to dig into some burgers with your brothers and you've just been told that 2 of your brothers are dead. Do you comprehend that? Can like a 7-year-old mind even kind of grasp what that means?
No, I think definitely in the moment I couldn't comprehend it. I froze.
Yeah.
I went full silence. I didn't ask any more questions. Because she finished off with Michael and Andre are in heaven.
Yeah.
And I just remember looking up to her and going, oh. And then I just lay there. I'd no one to chat to. The people that were the closest people to me were either unconscious or they weren't with me anymore. So I remember, my whole world got turned upside down.
Yeah.
I just lay there in complete silence.
So can you unpack the events that led to that moment of you being in hospital for people listening, just to understand? Because you must wake up and you go, my mum's in a hospital, 2 of my brothers are gone, my other brother's unconscious lying next to me. What happened? In the mind of everyone goes like, so what happened? Do you want to tell us what happened?
Sure. So I don't remember being told what happened.
Yeah.
I've read what happened, who told me. I do recall being in the hospital when they moved us from the emergency unit to a normal bedroom, if you can call it that. And my bed was closest to a big window where Philip, my older brother, his bedroom was to my left. And I remember just burst out into tears, screaming outside the window, looking outside and just in tears. And I remember screaming, why us? How could this happen to us? The person who actually told me what happened told me the full in-depth details about what happened was about a year later when my mom came to visit us in Portugal. So what happened was on Friday the 13th of November, after we arrived to get our burgers, takeaways, and we went back home, when me and my brothers went upstairs to get ready, to change clothes, and we came downstairs. In that space of time, my mom had put tranquilizers and sleeping pills into our food, with with the intention of putting us to sleep. So I don't recall eating the burgers. I remember arriving home and going upstairs. That's my last memory. So we ate the burgers. And then the next, I'm not too sure what we did after that, so who went what or where. But then we all fell asleep. And at that stage, my mom came around. Her idea, let me just give some context. Her idea, as you've mentioned, from the age of 4, in the space of those 3 years, she had a divorce with my father. Beyond the divorce, my father also, that I learned through working with you, he was extremely unfaithful. There were other add-ons to that. So that's already number one. Number 2, her brother came to stay with us in South Africa. He had cancer. He passed away. Her mother came to stay with us in South Africa. She passed away.
Because they're originally from Portugal.
Yeah.
Right,
So
I forgot to mention that. So they're originally from Portugal. They come over to South Africa for their medical studies. They could have gone back to, work in some prestigious Portuguese hospital, but instead they stay in South Africa, and your mum actually goes and start working in hospitals or medical, clinics in different areas of South Africa, some poor areas, and so that's how they ended up staying in South Africa.
Correct. Yeah. At that stage, South Africa still had an incredibly brilliant name worldwide. So they came and did their internships in South Africa and never left. So then on top of all of those 3 extremely close family deaths.
Well, actually, let's just go back to what you said. Your uncle came, stayed with you, and her mum came and stayed with you. Both die. Yeah.
Correct.
And then third thing.
Then she gets cancer.
Yeah.
So as a result of her having cancer, she's unable to work. So she gives the money that we did have to a broker in the hope that they can create some sort of income, look after the money to create, generate income so that she can look after my brother and my brothers and I. So all of that pressure just got too much.
Yeah.
So on that evening, after me and my brothers were fast asleep, she came around and gave us each lethal injections. And I remember her telling me the story, and I'm so grateful when she did tell me the story, that she was just told me absolutely everything. So she went to each of us one at a time, was trying to find, as weird as it sounds, as a general doctor, she was trying to find like the spot to inject. So like she said, like with me and my brothers, like a few of us, she would have to inject twice, because she just, as you can imagine, what state a human must be in that stage. So yeah, she went around and gave us all lethal injections. At the same time, she had also taken the sleeping pills. And then once we were all asleep upstairs, she came downstairs, and we used to live in a beautiful house in
Morningside,
Sandton, Morningside. Yeah. And she came downstairs, went through the living room, and then she also tried to give herself a lethal injection, because that was the whole idea. A whole reason behind it was like, I want out, but who am I going to leave my boys with?
Yeah.
The rest of the family's in Portugal. I can't leave this burden on.
And she was in debt.
Yeah.
She was in debt.
Huge debt.
800,000 rand debt to banks. She was behind on rent. And
we were about to move houses. Remember that clearly, house searching with my brothers. But we were about to move houses, but I didn't know that there was a judgment against her. So the bank was coming to take the house. So again, that was just huge financial added on stress to everything else. So yeah, as she went around the rest of the house, she had petrol. She started spraying the petrol around the house from the far side of the house. So that's where you spoke about earlier, where we used to come in the house on the left. You had this beautiful study where it was my mom and my dad's. And then she started on that side and lit the house on fire. So, and she carried on roaming around the rest of the house.
Probably in a completely manic state.
Yeah, manic, who knows what state. And yeah, fortunately it was a tow truck driver. Those guys that, when there's accidents, well, especially in South Africa, if there's accidents on the road, they're normally the first guys to first guys on the scene. So they saw the smoke coming from the house. So of course they immediately radioed into the emergency services. As they arrived, the fire brigade arrived at the house. They both jumped the gate immediately and they came through the house. At that stage, they saw my mom walking around the house, still trying to continuing to light the house on fire. They went upstairs and they, of course, had no idea who's upstairs, how many boys are upstairs. And they went to each of my brothers. They started off, they came up the stairs, they turned right. And then the first bedroom on the right was where my older brothers, Andre and Philip, were. They checked the pulses. Philip still had a pulse. Andre at that stage didn't have a pulse. So immediately they took both of them out. Again, it's quite a walk down, put them outside. Then they came back in. And then the one went right again. And then the other one went left where I was. And again, checked for pulses. The guy that checked before he was about to check on me, his colleague said, okay, this one doesn't have a pulse. So they were constantly trying to communicate with each other. Then he checked me. I still had a pulse. So again, they took both of us out immediately. At that stage, the rest of the fire brigade had arrived. They had put it was 1/3 of the house had been burnt down. They managed to control it. And they took us out. And that's pretty much it. And my mom doesn't remember what happened there. What I'm telling now is from all the articles, the work that we've done.
There's a moment in your story, and I'm not sure if you're willing to go there, and it's okay if you're not. I just want to context that. There's a part of that story that I remember your mum telling you that for me was like this moment in the story that you could just imagine at what place she must have been. It's when Michael woke up. Andre woke up. In the midst of all this, while your mum is going around trying to set fire to the house, Andre comes down the stairs and he sees your mum. Do you want to tell us about?
Yeah, sure. So again, this was my mum who told me as she was downstairs lighting the house on fire, Andre, my oldest, closest brother to me in terms of age, he came down the stairs and my mom sat him down on the couch and was able to get him to sleep. And at that stage, she gave him another lethal injection. And I remember her telling me that there she was, her son Andre, my brother Andre, was lying in her arms, and she literally saw him pass away in her hands. At that stage, she managed to carry him back upstairs, and then she carried on.
Thank you for sharing your story and opening up, because I know it's not an easy story, and there's a lot of unpacking to do around that story, especially around some of the fears that we had when we talked about sharing this story with the judgment towards your mum. But I'm curious now in terms of you, because some of these details sort of come out shortly after that you wake up from hospital. In terms of it becomes apparent that it wasn't an accident, that your mum was probably responsible. That's why she's in a separate part of the hospital than you are. At this point, your uncle flies over from Portugal to come and be with you and your brother in South Africa. You've never met your uncle. He doesn't speak English.
No, I hadn't met him.
You had met him?
Yeah, come to visit us before at the house,
cool.
Yeah.
But he didn't speak English?
No,
and you didn't speak Portuguese?
No.
Right, that's it. And he comes over, I guess, to help out arrange the funeral for your brothers, to try and navigate this kind of, minefield of what happens with your mum and what happens with you. Do you remember that period of time, that kind of like the post-hospital? Because I know I read somewhere in an article that what was on your mind is like, am I going to be able to go back to school?
I do remember it actually. I've got quite a few vivid memories. I think asking, can I go back to school? Because that was the only constant thing that I still had at that stage. So it was a safety net for me. So after the Friday evening, we only woke up the Sunday afternoon. So then we got moved, and then it was around the Wednesday when we left the hospital. at that stage, my uncle hadn't arrived yet in the country. So the first few nights we actually stayed with some of our friends from Montrose, the primary school we went to, with Corinne and her family, which I remember vividly. I remember vividly going back to school. My brother Philip, 3 years older, his grade was writing exams. So he just stayed in the computer room playing games. And I remember with my grade 1 teacher, her name was Miss Nelson, who I still chat to this day. I remember that those first few days, there were 2 or 3 times a day where I'd ask her, can I go see my brother? And I remember she would like literally gave me a hand as me like a little 7-year-old. So I'd reach up to her hand and would walk down all the way to the computer room, which was on the other side of the school. So I remember those walks, and then just going back to school to be with my brother. You don't remember, because I've never asked you this, you don't remember your friends asking you what happened? You don't remember having to go back to school and people looking at you, or parents like that? Do you have any memories of that, of like the aftermath? At school, no. The first time I remember was so let me just talk about the other stuff that lead up to the funeral. So then of course my uncle arrives. I remember we spent a few nights at the new house that we were actually meant to move into. So we spent a few nights there. I remember we went to the house. We went to go visit the house. Oh yes, your yes, right, the house in the state, the burnt down house. So I remember clearly arriving there with my brother and uncle, and like I said, one third of the house was burnt down. We walked through the rest of the house. I remember walking up the stairs, and as you turned left, which was my mom's main bedroom, I used to sleep there with her on my mattress on the floor. And as I walked into the room, I remember looking down to my right, and I saw the syringes that had been used for the lethal dosages for me and my brother. So as I walked around the house, there were syringes. There were still some of the burger packets on the floor.
What's going through your mind? Like, do you, and I know that it's a hard ask given how long ago it was, but do you just is it feel a bit surreal? Is it scary? Are you sad?
I was completely numb. I remember walking through it, but not feeling anything. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know what to feel. So it was just, I just remember walking around looking like in a total state of shock. Like, did this really happen? Is this happening? Is this real? And then I remember from there, on the same day, we went to go look at my brother's bodies. So this was the day before the funeral. And it's a moment I'll never forget. I remember the coffins were right at the end. And this is, of course, the first time I've ever seen a dead body. So we walked down, it's a long aisle all the way to the stage. And the front lids, if you can say that, of the coffins are open. So I remember I'm a little kid walking, and then on the left was Michael's body, on the right was Andre's body. And I remember looking over and seeing both of their bodies, their faces. I remember vividly the dried lips, purple lips. And I remember then I walked away with my brother and uncle, and I think my mom's friends were also there. And I asked to go back. So I went back by myself with my uncle. He walked a bit with me, and then he let me go. And then I remember I actually went back and I touched their bodies. Because I don't know why, there was just something inside me that wanted to touch them, to see like almost like if they were really gone. And I remember that feeling of touching them was like, even now my hands get tingly, was just pure coldness. So I remember I touched them both on their cheek. And then...
Did you cry?
I don't recall crying, no. And then I remember, so back to your question, where if I recall anyone looking at me or my brother or asking questions at school about what happened, I don't recall that. But then the following day at the funeral, we arrived last. So everyone was there. So now we had to go down that long, same straight aisle, but now with...
Is this a church? Is this it's a church.
It's a church, full of people on both sides. And again, I remember just as a little 7-year-old holding my uncle's hand and just walking down and looking to my left, looking to my right, and just seeing everyone looking at us. So that was really difficult. And I remember sitting, of course, right in the front on the left side. And again, I don't really remember crying.
I have to tune into my own curiosity and also what people might be thinking or ask themselves who are watching, listening to this. Is there a point from the moment you wake up in hospital to even to this point when you're at the funeral where I'm guessing, and I know you can't remember when you were told that actually your mum was responsible for what happened, for, if you can call that being responsible, that was behind this. Were you angry at her? Were you upset? Is there anything that you can recall in terms of how you felt towards your mum at that point, realizing that two of your brothers are gone? Anything at all?
No. In terms of emotions to my mum, it's unfortunate I can't remember who told me. And I assume they told me that my mom was responsible. I'm sure they would have, but...
To explain why your mum wasn't, why you couldn't see your mum.
But I recalled clearly the last time I saw my mom in the hospital, because we hadn't seen her. It's the only time I do recall seeing her. So she also, of course, was in a severe state. Because, of course, the smoke inhalation, all the drugs. So she took longer to come around. She was full of burns on her body. So when the fire guys walked into the house, she was on fire. So they had to pat her down with blankets first. So she had severe wounds to overcome. So I remember it was the day before we were leaving, where it was me, my brother, my uncle, and my mom in her room in the hospital, and that's when we were discussing. Okay, cool. My brother and I, Philip, are moving to Portugal, and I remember two things clearly. My mom asked my uncle in Portuguese if he minded if we called him Dad. Which he responded he didn't. And then the second thing is, again, as I was leaving, I turned back and I said, bye, Mom. And she said, yeah, it's not goodbye, I'll see you again. So yeah, there was definitely no anger at that stage towards or anything. It was my mom.
Yeah, of course.
I knew her before
you're 7.
this. Yeah, I knew. 7. And you can see like how emotional I was because I knew her before. So it was just so much to take in those, we're talking 1.5 weeks before I was out the country. So,
I mean, your world's turned upside down. You wake up, your brothers are gone, your mum's in hospital, you don't know when you're going to see her next time, and you're just being rooted out of South Africa, the only home you've ever known, to a place you've never been, into a home you've never lived, in Portugal. So, yeah, I can only imagine what, kind of a mindfuck it must have been, for a small child.
Yeah.
And so you go to Portugal and you arrive there with your brother and you don't speak the language and you're staying with your uncle. Do you remember that transition, how that was for you in terms of having to arrive and start a new school, missing your mum in some ways, like anything that comes up for you?
Yeah, I remember the first 6 months we couldn't go straight into school.
Yeah.
So it would have been more than 6 months because the Portuguese school year doesn't run from, it's similar to the UK year. It runs from September to October, where South Africa, it runs from January to December.
Okay.
So we arrived November, December, and we spent the first 6-7 months learning the language. So my cousin's husband's wife, Anna, she looked after my brother and I for the first 6 months. Almost like, if I recall, it was almost like an aftercare facility. So in the mornings we would be with her. She's on that taught us the language. So I have memories of that, like playing yo-yo again with my brother, other guys, girls in the class. So I do remember those fond memories of playing the yo-yo. But the biggest thing that helped me with that transition at the time was being introduced to football. So my uncle and cousin Nando, they were crazy Benfica supporters in Portugal. So I remember going with my brother. We became members. We went to all their home games, and it was just it brought a lot of joy to myself in particular at that time.
There's something that really stood with me when you introduced that this new passion, I guess, in some way for football that came in, is that when you were in the stadium, everybody shouted. And so you could shout too, and nobody would hear you. Nobody would have, you could express yourself fully. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I remember it was like a game me and my brother used to play. It would be like, Danny, say this or say that. And you didn't have to ask me twice.
Yeah.
So it would just be like, screaming. I'd learn the chants. I remember we used to sit right at the top on the left side. And yeah, it was just full of moments where I wasn't in my head. I was just in the moment.
So you weren't thinking about your brothers?
I wasn't thinking about absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I was right there watching the football, spending time with Philip, spending time with my uncle and cousin, singing, chanting.
Yeah.
It just gave me, I guess, a safe place, a place to just be and express myself, not forget about everything else that was happening.
Being a kid, being back to being just a kid.
Yeah.
But you start, you get bitten by the bug. And you get bit by the bug and you start wanting to play a bit of football and you start kicking the ball around. And next thing you know, your brother and you start doing trials to try and integrate a football team. And your brother tries to go for your uncle's team. But what happens?
Yeah, so like one thing I forgot to share, of course, as you can imagine, all boys, sport was a huge part of our upbringing, especially football. And being the youngest, I always naturally get chucked into the goals.
Yeah.
So we started playing football. We went for trials at Benfica, which was the team that we were all crazy about. And my brother didn't make it through his process. So I was still in my process. So he went to another team. And then, of course, due to logistics and all of that, it made total sense that we went to the same team.
Yeah.
So we ended up going to a team called Bilnench. And again, we would train 3 times a week. We would have games on a Sunday morning. And I remember clearly after the games, they used to always give us like a nice pastel de nata because it was in the part of where the original bakery is from Belém, Lisbon.
Yeah.
So that was my favorite part because then I'd get the pastel de nata, would go have lunch, and then I'd go watch my brother play. So that's how our Sundays looked. And I mean, that's where, again, my first love for, well, not my first love, but my deeper understanding the power of sport, the power of football came into my life. And I can genuinely say at that stage, it was, in a way, it definitely saved my life. Having something like that, something bigger than me, where I could go into it and focus 100% on it and not worry about anything else.
The other gift that he gave you is an opportunity to fully express yourself in a way that maybe you didn't give yourself permission outside the field. So on the field, you could be aggressive and, being the youngest of 4 brothers, you're probably used to having bigger people running at you, trying to get past you. And so you would go for the challenge, you would really, and meet it. There's a moment though, where you're suddenly watching TV, the news, right? Because like your uncle used to watch the news in the evening and you're sitting there maybe with your brother and then your mum appears on television. She's being interviewed about the trial because your mum obviously went through a judicial process after the incident of the 13th of November. What was that like to see your mum on television? Because you hadn't seen her in a little while and suddenly you see her being interviewed. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember it clearly. So at that point, she hadn't come to visit us yet in Portugal. So we always used to watch the 8 o'clock news. After dinner, if we weren't at football, we would watch it all together in the TV room. And I remember clearly the gentleman that you would see most nights. And then all of a sudden, my mom pops up on the screen and they have a live phone call where he's chatting with my mom about the trial. And because at that stage, that's when the news came out that she had been found not guilty due to, what's the wording? Due to being mentally insane
incapacitated at the time.
That news came out and
just on that, because I remember something that again grabbed my attention is that during the trial, a lot of the patients came to her support. A lot of people came to her support and basically said that her nickname was the good doctor back with her patients. So for people, again, watching this, listening to this, who are trying to wrap their mind around how could someone go and support someone who had caused this sort of pain, how do you want to explain that? How do you want to put that context on actually she had dedicated her life to serving others,
Sure. That was another fun memory I had with my brothers growing up. We couldn't all go together, or 4 boys was too many, so we used to go in twos to visit my mom at her medical practice. So her medical practice was based in a place called Wynberg, which is right next to Alexandra, one of the biggest townships in South Africa. So a township is like a favela from Brazil, extremely poor conditions. So that's where my mom decided to have her practice. So that's, again, now looking back, where there was the first lesson that I learned in my life, how to serve a bigger community. So I remember going there as a kid, and it was normally like on weekends, Saturday mornings. And it was a very cool building because most of it was very empty. Not too many businesses or anything was around there. So as a kid with my brothers, we would go explore that whole building, and then we'd come back and see the patients, and then my mom, and it was really, really fun memories. So that's where she had that huge impact with her patients, the amount of care that she would give. So when everything happened, I mean, even just the first week when she woke up, and this is based on reading the news articles, they had to move her from hospitals because she would get patients that would come visit her at whatever time. I mean, it's even written that apparently one patient came to visit her at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. So they really knew who she was. Without her at that stage, there was no other means for them to be looked after from a medical perspective. So she had a very, very incredible connection with her patients.
So you see on television, and the next day you've got to go to school. And so other people have seen that too. I mean, it's the evening news. I remember you telling me this about that morning when you came in, and what was going through your head, what's happening.
Yeah, that was really, really tough. Again, because you walk in, and as soon as so we used to take the bus to school. So even just getting on the bus, I was dreading it. So again, as you step onto that bus, kids, they can't hide their emotions or what they think or the way they look. So I remember stepping onto that bus, and just kids all stopped talking and just looking at me and my brother. So we just sat together silently, didn't want to chat to anyone. Almost like, I don't know, it just comes to my mind now, like we're sitting there like almost like trying to create a protection around us, like invisible. Yeah. We're trying to be invisible.
Yeah, you didn't want to be the center of attention.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we left the bus and we walked into the schoolyard, that was similar to that moment where I was walking down the aisle in the church towards the coffins for my brother's funeral. Again, it was just all eyes. It was almost as if as soon as we stepped into there, everyone just looked. And it was a weird feeling because it felt like we were walking in slow motion. That was never ending. I remember walking past kids, and like kids that I used to, for example, be playing with the day before. Now all of a sudden they're looking at me like in total fear. They don't know what to think. Who knows what they've been told.
Say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was a really, really tough day. I remember that.
Yeah, I remember you saying like all you wanted to do was just to be invisible. I just wanted to be a boy. I just wanted to be able to have a school. But then your mum gets to visit.
Yeah, correct.
She gets to come over to Portugal. Tell us about that moment, that day.
How do I describe it? Like a bit of, you can see it again by my smile, just a bit of light in all of that, because we were, of course, in constant communication with her through the phone. We really did miss her, of course. And I remember we went to go pick her up from the airport. We were taken to almost like a private access area. So we were allowed private access area. So instead of waiting for her outside, we were allowed to come in where she would go collect her bags. And I remember clearly it was me, my brother, and my uncle. And we're there waiting, and we don't know which direction she's going to come from. So it's not like it's all open plain. It's full of pillars. So me and my brother are looking. We're nervous. We don't know what to do. We're like, hey, where's mom? And then I remember clearly seeing like a glimpse of her, and then the sight got shut off by a pillar, and I'm like, was that her? And then as she came around the pillar, me and my brother just went woof, and we just sprinted at easily about 50 meters, and we just sprinted towards her, and we just gave her the biggest hug, and yeah, it was just a full letting go, just like it was my safety net.
Well, you must have been holding up. You must have been holding so much, especially that for anybody who's been, to South Africa, and I can imagine, because I used to live in outside of Joburg, so I can imagine that childhood, a lot of outdoor space, and then suddenly in Portugal that might be a bit more urban where you are, and also it's a lot for kids to kind of deal with, this idea of that I'm living away from a country that I was born in, my mum's away, I miss it. So you see it, suddenly there's this kind of big melting. I don't know if you remember, I asked you this question when we were going through your story. And that is because, again, I'm keeping in mind the skeptics kind of listening to this going like, well, wait. She actually continued to be a medical doctor, right? She was able to have a license put back. That's one thing. 2, when she comes over to Portugal, are there any family members who have some judgment towards her, or who are apprehensive of her coming over and maybe spending time in their house or with their children? Like, did you ever feel there was any kind of, we must be careful, or, there's some sort of danger involved with her being here? Was any of that?
From my memory, no. None whatsoever. And the only way I can describe that is just, again, they knew who my mom was. Yeah. Before everything. I remember the first few days we spent, she stayed with us at my uncle's place, and then that's when my uncle and aunt were at work.
She sat you down? That's
when she sat my brother and myself down, and I remember I was sitting on her lap, and that's when she explained everything that happened in full detail. From there we went up north to spend time with...
So just on that.
Sure.
Did you have questions when she was telling you this? Do you remember if you had any questions for her? Was there anything that...
I don't think I needed questions. What I do remember is she said, like, listen, I'm going to tell you guys absolutely everything. And she took it step by step.
Took ownership.
Yeah, took ownership. And that's why, like, for example, I know the details of what happened with Andre. Yeah. Because no one else would have been able to tell me those specific details. So I think that, in a way, gave me a lot of closure, just knowing exactly what happened. And it also allowed me to see my mom's reaction, because, I mean, the way she was describing it to me, she was distraught. Yet she said, for you guys are the only reason I'm here. And from that moment until her passing, Philip and I were her life.
Yeah. Did she ever say sorry?
Yes. Yeah. Constantly. Especially when it came to like anniversaries of Michael, Andre's birthdays, or the 13th of November, or other times, like for example, whether it was like watching an inspiring movie or specifically music, that would tear her up quite a bit, and then she would apologize, and like that guilt didn't leave her. And I got again to see firsthand the
cost of guilt,
the tremendous cost of guilt, shame, grief, all of those top 3 emotions.
So obviously I wish we had a 6-hour podcast. So I could distill everything because there's so much more. But I want to give some context. So you continue this, your mum goes back to South Africa, and she said, we'll be together soon. I'm going to get you back soon. But you continue your football kind of passion, I guess, in some sense. I want you just to take us back to that moment, that first time you felt the power of a crowd, when you were in the goal and there's this moment and people cheering for you, and you felt something for the first time in that moment. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. Totally opposite feeling to when all eyes are on you in a pity, self-pity way, or
awkward, or uncomfortable, or
So I remember we were playing, I was 7 at that stage? No, 8. So I was playing 1 year above at the team called Bull Nench, and we were playing Sporting. which is Benfica's rivals in football, almost in Lisbon. So it was a huge game. And at that stage, how it worked, the team had 2 goalkeepers. So they would swap goalkeepers normally at halftime. And it was such an intense game where it was 0-0 at halftime. And they didn't swap me. The coach kept me in. And I remember then 5-10 minutes into the second half, they scored. And then there was one particular moment that I'll never forget. And it comes down to what you mentioned earlier, where that's having no fear, just jumping at anything. And it was one of my strengths as a goalkeeper. And that comes from all the times I used to wrestle in the house with my brothers, play football, build forts. So we always got physical in the end, but I had Michael, the oldest one on my team, so we always won. So I remember there was one specific moment where I saved the ball and then it rebounded and it was on the line. The ball was on the line and there's me as like an 8-year-old. And I remember I just jumped on it. And as I jumped on it, the guy came in just in time. I was able to prevent him from getting to the ball. So I was just lying on the ball like this. And I remember looking and I remember seeing the line and I was like, wow. And so I picked up the ball, we carried on the game. And then a few minutes later, the coach substituted me for the other goalkeeper. And this was the first time I ever experienced it. Was as I was coming off, all the parents on the side were clapping and cheering me on. And I remember just looking at it and I was like, okay, this is a new feeling. This is different. Where compared to the feeling that I had when other people were looking at me after the news or at the funeral, that was self-pity. And I've never to this day wanted people to feel sorry for me. So that feeling I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, you were seen.
Yeah, 100% in full expression. And that's where, again, my further love for football came. Because I was like, okay, I can experience this emotion here. I'm like, okay, I want to do more of this.
So you go back to South Africa. There comes a point where you go back to South Africa to be back with your mum, with your brother. And she's now moved away from where you originally were. She's in another house and she's working. So you're going back there and it's like an adjustment and you're playing outside. But then you ask her a question that with hindsight must have been a really difficult question to grant. Do you remember that question?
Yeah. Well, it was a question, but also more like a demand.
A request.
So as soon as we came back at that stage, my mom lived about 45 minutes from where we lived. She had moved away from, you can almost call it like the city. And she was just rebuilding her life over the last 2.5 years. And when we moved...
You spent 2.5 years away from your mum?
Yeah.
Yeah, from like 7 to 9 to 10. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. So when we came back, my brother and I, of course, were like, Mom, can we go back to the same school?
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, no problem. And I'll never forget it. The first day we arrived at the reception area of the school to go back in to fill out all the paperwork, to get enrolled again. And I remember clearly as we walked in the reception, I just remember seeing the ladies behind there like in total shock about who had walked in. And
of course,
it was at that moment, and now looking back, I'm like, and I got to see it firsthand for the next 3 years when I was still at that school, because at that stage, Philip only had 1 year left. I stayed at that same school for 3 years. And my mom came to most of the games when she could, when she wasn't working. Came to like some, what used to be called like Tiki afternoon, where it was like one, I think it was on a Friday or Saturday, where there'd be different events at the school where kids can go play and all of that. And I remember she came to those. And I mean, if you talk about someone facing their demons and taking accountability for what they've done. And of course there was judgment. I remember she always used to wear glasses, almost, I guess, in her way of trying to be invisible. Yeah. When she didn't need them at times, even inside. It was just, I guess, her way of protecting herself, not wanting to make eye contact or be seen by other people. But she showed up.
Yeah. I mean, that, especially now, looking back at it, it must have been really difficult for her to have to go back to where she knew people knew what she had done and what had happened. And yet, for the sake of you and your brother, as you kind of said, she then decided to put you first and dedicate a life to you both to try and make ends, try and make up for what happened. So you go to school, you continue your football, but then you've got this dream of like, I want to become like a professional goalkeeper, and you start going and doing, is it what do you call them, tests or trials or that kind of stuff? Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Sure. Again, that was one of the blessings of being in Portugal, because at that young age you taught the basics.
Yeah.
So it becomes almost natural to an extent. So coming back to South Africa, I had those natural abilities combined with the fundamental training, and I was a goalkeeper. It was fun, and I was really good at it. So at age 14, I was playing for a local club team in South Africa, and we went to go play in the Manchester Cup in England.
Okay.
It's called Manchester Cup, but it was just like your club teams. It wasn't Manchester United or anyone. Big names like that weren't present, but of course there were scouts. So we played in that, and Blackburn Rovers approached the coach afterwards, and they said, we're interested in having your goalkeeper come for a 2-week trial. So I went back to South Africa, and a few weeks later I came back to do a 10-day, 14-day trial period at Blackburn Rovers. And the feedback from them afterwards is just the main thing was physicality. I'm a goalkeeper, and I'm only 5.7, and most goalkeepers are at least 6.2, and most of them are close to like 196.
Yeah.
So that happened that year. Then the following year, with another club team I was playing with, we went to go play in the Milk Cup in Ireland, and again and not again. This one's a bit of a funny story, which I'm happy to share, because that's how much it meant to me. Because at that stage, what's really important is the journey from there, especially for my mom and us, wasn't smooth. So originally for the 5 years, when we came back, she carried on with the same practice, looking after the community with her patients. But as you can imagine, that didn't produce a lot of income. So she started looking at other work, doing locums at hospitals. And then that's when she transitioned into emergency services. So working as a trauma doctor. And she was going through all of that. So finances wasn't too good. Fortunately, so for our high school, we went to private school. So again, that was a huge cost. So at that stage, when I found out that second team, Newcastle United, were interested in me, the way the coach told me, it was a signed deal. So it was almost like just arrive for training for the trial, and they will sign you. So how it works in the UK, again, different to South Africa. Here, your year is from September to October, where South Africa, we're from January until December. So I'm born in August.
Yeah.
So he said, listen, I've told them you only turning 16 next year. So I've told them you turn 16 in September, which means that I'm an old 16-year-old, but I still have the full year to play under 16 in the UK, while if I'm in South Africa, I'm only under 16 until December. Then from the following year, I'm under 17. So he's like, I've told them you just have to change your passport. I'm like, okay.
As one does.
Welcome to Africa. So again, I remember getting off the plane, and there again, it's my mom right there to pick me up, and I walk off the plane and I'm like, Mom, if you don't make this happen, I'll never talk to you again. And I remember my mom's like, okay. We went home, and there's my mom and my brother, always incredible support for me. And straight away, we picked up the PlayStation. We picked up the camera. We picked up the DVD player. I think it was 2 or 3 cameras. And we went straight to a pawn shop. And we handed them in, and they gave us the money. And then that money was used fully for me to go pay for my plane ticket. I had to also pay for
the dodgy passport.
Yeah, and the dodgy passport, and I had to pay for the coach to come with me. And I remember in the moment, and I look back, and it's something that like you can even hear with my breath, is like I didn't even contemplate how my brother and my mom survived the 2 weeks I was gone, because my mom didn't have anything for those 2 weeks. She was in transition, and we had literally gone and pawned everything so we could just survive. But it wasn't survival. It was like, hey, we're putting it all towards Danny.
Putting all the eggs in one basket.
All of our trust in Danny. So when I went to Newcastle and had a good trial period with them, they're like, listen, no doubt you better than what we have at your age and the next age. The issue is that we got an under 19 goalkeeper that's 20 more centimeters taller than you. And that's the problem. So I remember coming home, and again, fortunately, my mom was in the medical field. I'm like, Mom, do you know anyone? Can we look at the option of growth hormones, all of this? And she's like, yeah, sure, let's do it. So they took an x-ray of my arm and the distance between your arm bone and your hand bone, and then the distance between your fingers to your hand. They can determine how much more you're going to grow naturally. So they did the x-ray, and I spoke with the specialist, and he's like, yeah, you'll grow maybe 3 more centimeters. I'm like, okay, great. I'm like, what happens if you put me on growth hormones? And he says, yeah, maybe 3 more centimeters. I'm like, okay, cool, let's do it. I'll take those 3 centimeters. And then he was like, yeah, the cost would be about 30,000 Rand a month, which is equivalent to about 1,200 pounds in today's exchange rate. And I remember I just stood up and I was like, okay, cool. Cheers. Have a good life.
Because that's not happening.
Yeah. But then from there, when I heard those news, it was again a double knock. So that really hit me hard.
Yeah.
I felt like I'd let my brother, my mom down, my friends down. I felt like I'd let myself down. So that led me into depression. Yeah. So I hid it well. At 16, I hid it well from everyone at school, but my mom saw me at home. And after a few weeks, she's like, listen, Danny, it's best that you go on antidepressants, which I'm so grateful she did put me on that side, on antidepressants, because if it wasn't for antidepressants at that stage, I'm not too sure what else I would have resorted to try and numb that pain.
Yeah, and you told me that you never wanted to feel the pain, that you tried to numb the pain, that you didn't want to feel the pain.
Yeah, at that stage, I didn't know how much I was protecting myself from the pain.
And so the unprocessed, like I think there's one of the kind of through lines that I've heard from your stories, like this unprocessed trauma that had happened that carried on over the years, because, you know, you then, from this point on, you kind of also dabble with college, this idea of going to college, you're in relationships, you hurt people too, you know, obviously, because that kind of is a consequence of being a trauma survivor. There's a car accident. Do you want to tell us about that night?
Sure. It was so from that 16 to about 22, I'd say. That was years where, for the first time in my life, I didn't have direction. So before that, it was always football. I want to become a football player so I could dedicate myself to that direction, where now that got taken away from me and I didn't react to carry on playing it besides school football, I started following what everyone else was doing. So I tried to go study, and I tried to do something that everyone did at that stage, which was a business degree called a BCom, even though I look back and it's like my passion's sports. But actually not my passions, both of them. But at that stage, I was just following it. So I didn't really even go to lectures the one year I went. So it was actually my brother, Philip, who called me up the one day and he's like, listen, Danny, wake the fuck up. It's time to come back to reality, come back home. Because I studied 1 year and a bit in Stellenbosch by Cape Town. So as I heard that, I came back. But I have missed a few years. So I matriculated, finished school in 2009. So my plan was always to go study the following year. That didn't materialize because of one of my marks for mathematics was 58 instead of 60. And at that stage, I thought I was king of the world. In terms of life, if you look at it, always reminds me of like a sports movie you see on
like
TV.
American Jock.
Exactly, 100%. So I was football captain. I had the model, most beautiful girlfriend. I was popular. I was this, that. So when they even told me I got 58 instead of 60, I didn't even bother asking them for a remark. I was like, okay. Then it was 2010, the World Cup. So at that stage, I didn't even have university. So I landed up taking a gap year.
Zuzuzelas, damn you.
Yeah, vuvuzelas. And yeah, fortunately, there were moments before where I got my license the year before, and there were 1 or 2 times before where drinking and driving came a thing. But that one night, I drank excessively. And I landed up taking all my friends home, and it was on the way home where we went past, you guys call it, in South Africa, we'll call it a robot. Yeah, it's a traffic light. And the traffic light turned orange. So instead of stopping, we're all like, go, 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 go. So I went and accelerated, and then I turned right and you go over a bridge. And then I didn't stop accelerating. So you hit a space on the side of the road where it's for, in South Africa, it's for taxis. Same thing can be used here for buses here. So I hit that, hit the drain, went across the road, hit the island in between the roads, boom, car flipped the other way. So we landed up facing this way. Yeah. Meanwhile, we're going that way. And then I remember all of that, boom, car stops. And I remember trying to start the car and it didn't start. And so we all got outside. And then I remember 3 petrol attendants. There was a petrol station about 100 meters away, coming sprinting towards us. And they're like, are you guys okay? Are you okay? We're like, we're fine. He's like, yo, you guys were in the air. That was crazy. And I remember my one friend went and collected the one tire that was about 50 meters from the car. And again, fortunately, the police weren't around. If I recall, they were on strike. So I immediately called the insurance, and I don't know how, they were really, really quick in terms of the tow truck came. And I remember pulling the chain, and I said, get this car on this fucking thing and get out of it.
Yeah.
So I still went to go stay at my friend's house, which was down the road, but I took the tire with me. So the following morning, there I am, 8 a.m. in the morning, pushing the tire up the house, and my mom comes around. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, yo, it's a souvenir. Because I didn't realize how bad, I didn't know. I found out that week.
Right?
I didn't realize that the car had been written off. So that week I found out. So again, I think that was the first time where it was, okay.
Bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, first sign to be a wake-up call, but it was the first, it wasn't the wake-up call that I got. So it was almost like the first little slap on the face, like wake up. And I was like, no, is that the only slap you have? What's next?
Okay.
So if I look back, that's how it was. Because I do genuinely believe that in life, you do get signs where it's like, okay, a little nudge.
Well, talking about a sign, you're driving in your car and you see a big sign on a billboard of an event, of a coaching event. And for whatever reason, you look at this billboard and you go, yeah, I'm going to go to this event, but it's a lot of money at the time for you, at least, to try and find a ticket to get there. And you manage to bring some of your friends or your brother, and you go to this event. What happens?
Yeah, sure. So I was always fascinated with like self-development and learning, and that springs from both my parents.
A psychiatrist and a doctor.
Yeah. And you recall, like you said in the beginning, where we would walk in the house and we had that beautiful library. So I remember always as a kid, back in those days, you had the encyclopedia. So anything you wanted to look up, you had to go look at the letters on the book, then go look and see, first of all, if it even had the word you're looking at, but then you would go read it. Oh my day.
For the youngsters listening to
before
this,
internet
and Wikipedia happened, you'd have these guys walking around selling you these encyclopedias, these thick books. And you're right, you'd have to go and find out in these books, A to B, whatever it was.
And I remember that clearly, and I was 7, before 7.
Yeah.
So that love for learning always was there. So this was at a stage when I just moved back from university, when my brother gave me that call. He's like, listen, come back to reality. At that stage, I tried to give football a go again as a player. And I was looking and researching and learning from different people around the world. And I'll never forget it. The gentleman's name who's had a huge impact from that moment, 2013 until 10 years later, where we sit now, was Dr. John DeMartini. So I remember, I can remember the traffic light stopped, the robot went green, I turned left, and as I turned left on the billboard, it's probably about 1 meter by half a meter type of little cardboard board. And I remember straight away reading it, and it was saying, it was a Wednesday, and it was saying he was chatting tonight. So I remember I quickly called 5 of my friends. The one guy I knew would come, the least guy that I expected came with, and the other guys didn't come. So 3 of us landed up going. We went that evening, and I remember listening to this guy, and I was like, wow, okay, this is really interesting. I enjoyed it. And then he's like, I'm hosting a seminar this weekend. So again, I remember going back home, and I'm like to Mom, please send Philip, but don't tell Philip, pay, and then he has to come. So she did it. And again, at this stage, what's really important is anything my mom made went straight to me and my brother. And we didn't use it like stupidly or that. It was always for football, or it was always for learning things. So even though like it would put it under pressure, for example, that I know put it under pressure, it's like, cool, I'll make it happen, let's go. And we both went and we did the seminar, and it's was an extremely valuable tool that I learned that weekend, and that's helped me to where I am today.
Yeah, 100%. And then to try and condense the next few years, so you go on this, self-development journey as well. You then realize that you're done playing football. There's a point in time like, you know what, actually this is no longer the dream, I'm done. But you sort of get lured into coaching. So you sort of start taking into a role of like, coaching younger kids. That journey then leads you to sort of exploring becoming a coach, potentially a football coach in the UK. You land, is it assistant coach? I forgot what the actual technical term is, somewhere in the UK. So you move from South Africa to the UK. And your brother's also in the UK at this point, right? Because he's working in finance or something like that.
Correct.
But then your mum gets sick again. And so you have to go back to South Africa. And you're frustrated. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So once I stopped playing football, the transition was, okay, let's get into coaching. So from 2014 until 2019, I spent those 5 years flying between South Africa and Scotland, getting my coaching badges, learning. I've always been fascinated and I love learning from the best. So I was actually reading a Jose Mourinho book, and he said, I went to Scotland logs. I'm like, okay, cool. That's where I'm going to go. So that's when the coaching came. And then my brother, which I always found fascinating because I always thought I would be the first one to leave. Because my brother and my mom were we were all very close, but my brother was extremely protective of my mom. So when he decided to move in 2016 to London, and it was based because when we started that journey together in 2013, the self-development and really working hard on ourselves, a lot also shifted for him in his life. So you got an incredible opportunity to go work for a hedge fund in London.
Because you were also working with your relationship with your brother. That was a big dynamic that you were trying to fix, because it was a complicated relationship.
Very complicated. So when we were in Portugal, we were always extremely close. So in Portugal, we used to play with each other because it was just me and him. Yeah. So we'd play outside. Instead of it being in a garden and on grass, it would be like 5 meters by 5 meters, if that, but concrete. But we'd always play together and we'd keep each other entertained. A lot shifted then when we got back to South Africa, our relationship, where we'd be wrestling or something, and then I would hit him or do something, and then he would lose it, and I'd learn very quickly. So there was a lot of anger, and he didn't know where to express it, so a lot of it came to me. So we didn't talk all the way up until like 2013. If you ask any of my closest friends, especially when he was driving, he would come pick me up from school. If one of them was in the car, would say hello. And the whole 30 minutes on the way home, not one word would be saying. We wanted to talk, but we didn't know how to talk. So what we talked through or connected through was football. So he moved to London first. So I was coaching professionally at the time in South Africa, and I was with him for like a 2-3 month period where I was trying to find a job in the UK. And then we got the news that my mom was sick with cancer. So immediately we both moved back to South Africa, and we spent the following 8 months every day with my mom through her journey of cancer.
Yeah. And you were with her on the day she died. And she, and I want to talk about that human complicated emotion that you had of like, you felt like you were getting momentum in your career in the UK, but yet you were kind of held back in South Africa because you had to care for your mum, which is a complicated dynamic to navigate. And then there's the night where you and your brother stay in hospital by a bed and you don't leave the hospital room. Tell us about that night.
Sure. So the first few months, because I always saw my mom as like a superhero. So when she told us September, that's when I was still doing my coaching licenses. So 2 weeks later, I had to fly to Portugal to do a club visit. And I didn't realize how serious it was. Before I left, we didn't even know it was cancer. It was only, I think they might have knew, and they didn't tell me just for me to go. But I remember that specifically, leaving the hospital and burst into tears, which was so rare for me because I was just extremely worried, and I'm like, okay, I'm leaving. And So then it was only from the January when it spread to the brain that things shifted in that regard. So at that stage, my mom was working at 2 hospitals as a trauma doctor. So, and that was also a beautiful thing to see how she transitioned from a general practitioner to being in a position with saving people's lives. I remember she would come home after saving a person's life, or come home after unable to save someone's life through CPR or other means. And I got to see both sides of it. So that's why I'm also extremely grateful that she was allowed to continue being a doctor. So she was based at the one hospital in Krugersdorp called Pinehaven. So we had, I wouldn't say, well, we definitely didn't have normal access to what people were allowed to do. But when my mom stayed at hospital, either my brother or I stayed there. There was no exception. So we would alternate who was there, who wasn't there. So, and because she had to go in quite a bit, where there was blood transfusions or to get the chemo. She would get the chemo and then her body would drop, poof, her iron, everything. So then we had to come back with blood transfusion. And then there were 3 or 4 times where we had to call the ambulance to come home to pick her up due to different reasons. So we were always alternating. So the last blood transfusion she had was the first time when they asked her, would you like to go lie in the bed, one of the rooms that they had in the oncology center? And it was the first time my mom ever said yes. And then as soon as she said that, we're like, okay, something's not right. So she went in to lay down, and that was on the Wednesday. So that's when the doctors came to chat to my brother and I, and they're like, listen, we think it's time. What we can do is let's keep her here. We'll put her up in the ward, in one of the bedrooms, make her comfortable. There's no point taking her home. Rather let us look after her here. We can look after control the pain management. So we straight away, thought that night she might even pass. So from the Wednesday until the Sunday, me and my brother didn't leave a hospital bed, a hospital room. So I remember our boss, Donnie, and the rest of the team would bring us food, but we didn't leave. We refused because we didn't know. We didn't want to miss the time when my mom would take her last breath.
Of course.
And I'll never forget, it was on the Saturday night, the Sunday evening, the 7th of April. And I'm lying there next to my mom. My brother's on the other side. Oh, I'm sitting, my brother's sitting. My mom's lying down. And I'm like, Mom. And at this stage, from the Wednesday until this time on the Sunday afternoon, we haven't been able to speak to her. She's in and out of consciousness. And I remember I turned to her and I said, Mom, I just need to send an email quickly. A CV, again, trying to apply for jobs overseas. As soon as I sent that email, my mom's eyes opened, woof, and she started breathing excessively, which after investigation from the prior days before, it's called rattle breath, which is a natural process into death. And as soon as that happened, she started, as I said, breathing excessively. And then my brother looked at me, he was there and I was here, and he's like, hey, Danny, sleep. Don't feel guilty, just sleep. So we were exhausted, we hadn't slept at all, so we just fell asleep. And then again, bizarrely, something woke us up both at 3:20, the Monday morning, the 8th of April. And as we both woke up, my mom was, of course, still alive, but now her breathing had become like that, mouth
shallow.
Open, but very shallow, no sound. And the nurse came in just to check on us, and we're like, thing. And then I'll never forget, it was just after 3:30 where my brother and I were overlooking my mom. We had the incredible gift of seeing her take her last breath.
Your relationship to your mother is also unique in the sense that because of what happened, it created a bond that is difficult for other people to understand or even to explain into words. The natural reaction that people might expect is for you to run away, to be afraid, to judge. But instead, it actually got you closer to your mum, and you loved her more deeply. And in fact, you were afraid of losing her. That was one of your biggest fears, growing up as a child, growing up as a young man. And then the moment happened when she was no longer here. What helped you process that? What helped you deal with that?
2 things come to mind. Number 1, my brother, having him there with me. We immediately moved to London. So I was around him, got to be with him, knew he understood. No one else understood what we had been through or what I was experiencing. So I had him straight away. So again, I still had that safety. And then the second thing, I had direction in terms of what I wanted to do work-wise, career-wise. So I could come to London, then it was straight away, okay, cool. For the next 6 months, my priority, focus. I need to find a job. I need to go drop off CVs. I need to email. I need to phone calls. I need to network. And I did all of that for 6 months. So those were the two main things that helped me. Yeah. Again, it was a few times later where I only realized how much I'd blocked off.
Of course.
Because crying and all of that was never normal in the house. So you talk about like the relationship I had with my mom, where I remember even after my mom passed away, it was the first time any of my close friends asked me, did you ever judge your mom? And I remember it was a question that really pissed me off. And I struggled with it for a while because I started contemplating. I'm like, why didn't you judge your mom? Why weren't you angry with your mom? And where I sit here today, the only answer I can give and that I know is true is I knew my mom who she was before and I know my mom who she was after. I've just experienced the extreme end, what a human being can go to when it all just becomes too much.
And the aftermath of that.
Yeah. And like I said, I got to have the front row seat to see how you redeem yourself from something that's almost unredeemable.
Right.
But I'm seated here because of the woman that raised me.
And I think what she showed you is also this incredible strength and courage and face and take ownership actually of what happened, the consequences of it. And I think it's a question you'll get. A lot of people will ask you this question over and over again. Did you ever have feelings of judgment, resentment, or
not once?
That's
like you said. The way it felt like it was a deeper love.
Yeah,
it was
right.
I mean, I used to, as soon as I moved back to South Africa, grade 4, I would always be the one most of the time waking up my mom. And there were times like where I'd look at her and it would look like she was breathing, and I'd like shake her and she wouldn't do anything, and I'd be like, And you talk about the fear. It was the first line that I said at her memorial. It was like, this past week, the biggest fear of my life has become a reality, losing my mom.
Yeah. You go back to the UK, you continue to try and pursue this career, and you live with your brother. At this point, you live with your brother. Your brother's in finance. You go through COVID. It's a very intense period. He has a partner, and he sort of gets sick, right? There's this kind of thing that happens. You don't really know what's going on. It's COVID. If you can tell us, like, that night when you had an argument, you were supposed to fly. You were supposed to fly that morning, and you have an argument with him, and then he slams the door.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. So the gap between losing my mom and then all the way to COVID was extremely tough for both of us. Again, I handled the situation well, but I really struggled behind closed doors. It felt like I was suffocating, but fortunately I'd continued the self-development work, continued working on myself, and I just the right amount of people around me that could help me to process it. I was always trying new things, where my brother had stopped the self-development thing. So all the trauma from a young boy, I also remember my brother was 3 years older than me.
Sure.
So he saw much more when we were young with things with my dad. He would have understood much more with the deaths of my uncle, my gran. So
your mum's cancer,
and he didn't have a good relationship with my dad at all. He hated him. So that started now creating physical symptoms, where initially in the March we thought it was COVID. Then he went back to work. Then his head started shaking. Then following that, I had to call the ambulance because he was hyperventilating at home. So then he took a 3-month break. And we went and actually had a great holiday in Portugal, me, him, and our cousins. And it was on my birthday. We went to go celebrate the Friday. I remember actually that morning I took a train to Gloucester. Gloucester, that's it. I always get made fun of for the way I pronounce that. To Forest Green Rovers because I went to go drop off my CV. Because at that stage, again, COVID had just hit. I didn't know if I was going to stay at the same football club the following season. So I remember I went there. I was back by 12, and he's like, "Can we let's go out for dinner, me, you, and his girlfriend, Barbara. So we went for dinner, we had a glass of wine, and he started sweating straight away again. And I immediately called the Uber. We had just finished eating. And for the first time in my life, I can say that I lay on my bed and I was wide awake like this. In that time, I realized, okay, cool. Things had shifted. I had to become the leader where he had always led me. So the following morning, when his girlfriend and him were about to leave, I said, guys, do you mind, can we have a chat in the TV room? So my first line to him was, and at that stage, between those other 3 episodes, I tried different ways of helping him that I knew. So I remember once I tried, like, for the first time, I said, he wanted to walk over and I grabbed his arm and I said, Philip, just fucking listen. I'm sorry the way I reacted yesterday. I love you. I'm here to support you, where we never spoke that direct before. So I remember I sat him down and I said, Philip, listen, I'm going to try to do something that you did to me in 2012.
When you told you to stop with your shit, come back and...
Yeah, when you helped me get out of jail. I said, listen, you're about to go back to work in 2 weeks' time. What's going to happen when that stress comes back, all of that? Can we put some sort of plan? Can we put some sort of tools into place that can help you cope with that? And yeah, that he immediately reacted and we had an argument. And following the argument, he walked out first into his room, closed his door, and I left straight away, put on my shoes, and I went for coffee. And at that stage, I was meant to fly the following early morning to go see my friends in Greece. And when I left, I got a message saying, I'll see you tomorrow. So I immediately called his girlfriend. And bear in mind, that was the first time I met her the night before. And I said, Barbara, is he coming to you? What's the story? And she said, no, he's just going to a hotel, but he says he'll come to me this afternoon. So I didn't think anything of it. I messaged him saying, listen, please speak to the one guy that I speak to. He might be able to help you, this, that, give you a different perspective. And he's like, no, everything will be fine. I'll talk to you tomorrow. So again, I was like, okay. Didn't think of it anything for the rest of the day. Didn't think anything. Or what's the words? I just carried on with the day. Sure. Stayed at home at the apartment that I was staying with him by myself. The following morning, she messaged his girlfriend Barbara messaged me at like 9 a.m. Have you heard anything? And I said, no, don't worry. It's not checkout time yet. He's probably just sleeping in. 12 o'clock comes. Still haven't heard anything. So we start getting a bit worried. What's going on? This isn't normal. I messaged him early morning. I didn't get a response. So she comes to the house around the apartment around lunchtime, and we start calling hotels because I didn't know where he had gone. Some of the hotels were kind enough to say, no, he's not here. Some of them came with the bullshit. We can't disclose things, where they got to hear my mouthful at them. But we couldn't find him. So now we're getting really worried. And then it was only about like 5:30 where the doorbell rang. I remember I ran to the front door and I picked up the phone and they're like, yeah, it's the police. Can we come up to see you? So we were on the first floor. So I immediately buzzed them in and I ran down the stairs. And as they were coming up, I met the 2 police officers thing and I said, what the fuck's going on? And they said, can we chat inside? So we walked up the remainder of the...
That must have been the longest steps in your life.
I was just thinking that. And we walked up the remainder of the stairs. There's me in front of them and there's 2 behind me. And my heart, I think, knew what was coming. My mind didn't even want to contemplate it. So as I walked in the door, I saw Barbara. She was in the living room, but she was looking at me. And I just did a face like that. And they came in, closed the door. As we walked into the living room, I said, what the fuck's going on? They said, yeah, sorry to tell you, but we found your brother at a hotel room. He has taken his life. At that moment, my fucking world just crushed. I burst into tears, just fell back onto the couch, was screaming, like, what the fuck am I meant to do now? How could this fucking happen? Here's fucking Barbara in tears. There's a police officer staring right in front of us. So then in the space of all of that, I'm able to ask how, what the fuck happened? And they like told me the way you did it. And yeah, they're trying to keep me calm. Eventually, I'm able to catch my breath after a few minutes. And then I have to start picking up the phone and tell family members what's happened. So I called my cousins and tell them, and everyone goes berserk. Called my brother's boss, who fortunately him and Danny, in the space of 15 minutes, were at the house to come support me and Barbara.
It's a lot to go through in one life, you know. You're the last remaining survivor of your family. You know, we used to talk about that you're the last man standing, the same way that you were on the goal line, and when all defense fails and the ball's coming at you, like you're the last person there. And first I want to acknowledge you for sharing your story with us today and having that courage. You once told me that you didn't know how to open up your heart. You know, I felt like today you did.
Yeah.
You know, you've lost your dad and your brother to suicide. Two of your brothers died when you were in some horrific fashion, and your mum died of cancer. You have every right to be sour. You would have every right to be depressed, sour, vengeful. Fill in the blank, right? I think anybody listening to your story would kind of go, how is he getting out of bed? You know, let alone be the light that you are, this kind of absolute presence of love. And I don't have a better question than asking you, like, how have you managed to stay alive, to stay on both those feet, and to still have an open heart, despite everything that's happened to you?
Yeah. Great question. It's been a long fucking journey. I think I need to put the answer into stages. So I think initially when everything happened, when I was left the country the first time at age 7, I had football, which was like my safety net, helped me to cope. Then that gets taken away from me. Then in those space of second stage, that space of, let's say, 6 to 8 years, there I'd find ways to cope. So I turned to alcohol, I turned to smoking weed to numb the pain. And then, but even between all of that, from age 16, I'd already started like reading, or I always loved autobiography. So I always had reference points to other people that had gone through adversity. So reading books and all of that and watching movies, I learned that adversity is a normal thing of life. I didn't see my adversity more or less than anyone else's. But deep down, also something from very young, I knew I survived 98 for some reason. So that was always in the back of my head. I knew I survived 98 for some reason. I knew I survived 98 for some reason. So then from 2013 until today, the last 10 years, the amount of work that I've done on myself is the reason that I'm able to sit here in the State. I mean, if you look back, just even the first time we met six months ago, I wanted to open up my heart. I didn't know how to open up my heart because I didn't want to feel. So I can look back at how the first, from 2013 to 2020 was all about using that method that I learned about, where I was able to process things and look at things differently from a mental perspective. But then my body and my heart wasn't connected to that. And because I'd block myself off as a defense mechanism. And I'm not just talking to the painful side of life, even the good side of life. I mean, if I look back at my life, there was numerous years where I'd make up excuses not to get into something. So I'd be out with friends or something. Most of my friends call me Costa, they're like, come do this or that. And I'm like, yes. In the moment, I'm like this. And then afterwards, my mind would start going and, okay, I'm like, okay, easiest way, okay, let me just make up an excuse so I don't have to go. So that was one of my coping mechanisms. And then now in the last 3 years, especially after my brother passed away, I got introduced to another tool, which is like the embodiment, breath work, meditation, yoga, And the gentleman came through, and I've been on a few retreats where now I've had to learn how to reprogram my whole system, my nervous system.
To feel.
So, and it's taken, weird enough, in the last 2 weeks, now coming back to London, where I had a very interesting relationship with, because it was always a place I wanted to come to be surrounded by the best, learn from the best, and it was an awesome experience at the beginning, moving here with my brother, where it ended off on a sour note. My brother passing away, and then me resigning from football beginning of last year because I wasn't enjoying it anymore as a coach. We're now coming back after all the work we've done, especially in the last 6 months, continued with the work that I continue to do with both sides of the head and the heart, has brought me to a place where a beautiful soul I spoke to last week for the first time. I was introduced by a very close friend of mine in New York, and it's exactly the tools I've used. She said, when you're able to connect your head and your heart, your voice comes out. And it was something that I always struggled, and I judged myself harshly for. It was like I'd be in situations where I want to talk, but I didn't know how to talk. And I'd be like, okay, what's wrong with me? This, that, they don't teach you that. But then I didn't realize it was just a defense thing, because I didn't want to go to any moments that I experienced before. I didn't want to go there. So for example, the first time we met and I was telling you my story, I remember my voice was squeaky, emotional, wasn't stable, because that's the power I was scared of. When you talk about your story, I was scared to go there, because I know on the other side of that, there's something powerful that I can utilize now where I sit here today. And that's the plan going forward, is now utilize that to serve other people.
On that, and because I'm also conscious of time and I want to distill your story again for another 2 hours, but we're coming towards the end of our time here today in this format. Someone listening to this or watching this, and I know it's a big question and it's going to be even harder to try and summarize it, but what do you want them to take away?
Just that no matter how difficult it gets, how things don't make sense, how you feel the universe is against you, firstly, don't ever give up hope. Find references in whatever form that inspires you to utilize to help you get through it. Use my story as a reference. At the end of it, I wouldn't change absolutely anything that's happened to me, because I know it's part of my mission, and I'm certain that anything that happens to anyone in this life is all designed for you. So it's all a matter of just perspective, and that's part of my mission now, is to teach people the tools that helps them to see that everything's on the way, not in the way.
Yeah. There's also something I want to pull out of you, which is the power, even how hard it is, of forgiveness, and especially forgiving yourself. Can you talk even 5 to 10 seconds about that? This idea of, you had front row seat of seeing how guilt-ridden your mum was and how it impacted her life. And even though you had, even if, forgiven, loved, whatever the word is, she never could get rid of it, until the very end. And if you could speak to anybody out there listening who may have done something that they're not proud of, something that they're ashamed of, something that they have guilt about, that is still to this day, rotting at them inside, what do you want them to know?
It's part of life. I don't think anyone can, I'm absolutely certain no one in this world can say that they've never dealt with guilt, shame, grief. Those 3 are the most powerful emotions. But under those 3 emotions, or under one of those emotions at a specific time, is who you are, is who I am. So the foundation of building the life that you want, that's the foundation, is figuring out who you are. So to anyone that's going through those normal emotions, there's ways to get under that. There's ways to process it. There's ways of looking at your own shit. There's ways of
letting go.
Because once you get beneath that layer and you figure out who you are, then you can start working your way up and seeing, okay, cool, how can I utilize this? How can I utilize that? How's that made me this? How's that? But the foundation, and that's what I've spent the last 10 years, or not even the last 10 years, that's what I've spent the last 32 years of my life figuring out, is who am I? A question that I always used to see, again, watching documentaries or videos, and even like Oprah, I remember she says always, like, you don't attract what you want, you attract who you are. And then it's owning that fully. So again, I've been there, I've been
trenches.
there where I didn't understand what was going on, where it felt like my throat was getting strangled. I always, until very recently, I always had like this huge, felt like a huge weighted stone in my stomach, where I would go through and still experience life, but it would be like, what's this? What's going on? So that no matter what feelings or experiences you have, there's a lot of people that have similar experiences. So look to them and get in touch with them. That's what I would actually recommend. Reach out to those people, because they're serving for a reason, and they would love to hear more from, and
Can people reach out to you?
help. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, Daniel, we're coming to the end. I want to acknowledge you and say thank you from the bottom of my heart for having invited me to play a very small part in your journey, to have been a witness of your journey, of your story, and to hear you today, just the way you kind of opened up and shared. And I'm in awe of you. I really am. Like, you inspire me. And I know that after hearing your story, I hugged my kids extra tight that night. I let go of a lot of the stuff that I felt shame about or guilt. And I've been working on myself around that, this idea of forgiveness. And I really believe that your story and your message is going to change people. And I've always, from that first time we talked in May, I could see you on a stage and talk and share your story, and whether that's a 15-minute format or a slightly longer. But on behalf of anybody listening and watching, thank you. Thank you for your courage, and thank you for your heart.
And just for me, Mark, it's been an incredible journey. Thanks for your patience. I mean, from day one, you made me feel safe. You understood. You pushed me, but you knew how far you could push me, which I really appreciated. And if it wasn't for you, I went to places that I didn't want to go. But I knew your hand was there. So I literally, like the metaphor I was speaking to earlier, I knew it was there anytime I needed it. So it was just me messaging you or whatever time. So that's why I was able to go so deeply. And the biggest thing that stands out, it gave me the courage and the strength to go do the research back in South Africa when I went home. And absolutely no one knows, but I went and got all the media stuff, and I read every single article. I've spoken to people.
There's a 220-page document, Google Doc, that you co-create.
That's the most important thing, and that's probably the best way I would like to finish this off. Is it takes work. There's no shortcuts. I've tried every bloody shortcut. They don't exist. But I think also the cool thing is that I've done tremendous amounts of works, and I've recorded everything I've done, especially in the last 10 years, just to show people that that I'm not here and I don't have some special strength or there's something special about me. That's all bullshit. I'm seated here today based on all the work and incredible people like you that come into my life, that have come into my life at the right moments.
So someone thinking about doing this work with me around unpacking their story, but they're hesitant, they're scared, they're not sure, what do you want to tell them?
A few things. I would say, again, use my experience as a reference. I think it's also been an incredible journey to watch your growth through it. The way, if I look at the questions you asked in the beginning to the incredible relationship we share now, you've taken me to a level that no one else could have taken me. You've helped me unpack my story in great detail that now will allow me the gift to go help and serve others. So if anyone's contemplating or doesn't even realize, and I think that's the thing, your story is who you are. So if you want an incredibly inspiring, challenging, courageous journey that at the end you figure out who you are, contact Mark and let him help you unpack your story. I think that's an incredible gift you can give yourself, and each of you deserve.
Appreciate it, brother. Before I go, I've got a gift for you.
Oh, thank you.
That we had a bit of a problem with the whole mail in Portugal, but I managed to get it back. So I'm so happy. So I just want to give it to you now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'll give you a second if you want to open it.
Yeah, definitely.
For those of you listening to this, Daniel's unpacking some sort of canvas cotton pouch.
Oh, beautiful.
So this is just the beginning of your story. And I want you to continue writing it. I want you to continue distilling the gifts and the message for people that can get away from it. And you're going to hear it, right? It sharpens as you share. So the more you share it, the more you'll get what people are landing. But that's just a very small gift that I hope you'll continue to deepen your story.
Yeah.
Cool.
I promise. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Well, I usually say, there you have it, folks. But that feels inadequate for the experience that we just shared together. I just want to say a huge thank you for tuning in, for listening, for watching, for allowing us to share Daniel's story. I hope it inspired you. I hope it moved you. I hope it was thought-provoking in ways that you needed today to be reminded of what matters. And if anything, I hope you took away that your story is one of your greatest gifts. And I always say this, but if you knew how powerful your story was, you wouldn't be sitting on it. And in fact, I truly believe that the story that's going to change your life isn't the one you'll hear, it's the one you'll share. So do reach out to Daniel, let him know that you heard this conversation or watched this conversation. If you've got any questions, he'd be very happy to listen. And if you want to find out more about how I could help you distill and unpack your story, you can, of course, buy my book, Glow in the Dark. That can help you in that journey. But also go and find out storycast.co for the next steps and how we can help you get your story out there so you can inspire and serve others. It's been a genuine pleasure and honor to spend this, hour and a bit together. Until next time, remember this, your story matters. I'll see you then.